Hi guys, today we're going to talk about cells and how we discovered them and what they all have in common. Since for many classes this is the first at-home lecture that we've done, I wanted to point out that you should have the notes in front of you, and at any time if you would like to review this information, you can watch and pause the video. And this is supposed to go in conjunction with usually your textbook. It's not supposed to replace it. So if you feel like you didn't get enough info, you can check there. You might want to keep questions on your notes as well if there's something you don't understand, so that you can ask about it in class. So let's get started. The discovery cells. So there's a key piece of technology that allowed for us to discover cells and study what they had in common, and that is the microscope. And if you look at this picture, the microscope wasn't always as fancy as it is today, but it basically magnified objects through a series of lenses so that they could be drawn and studied. So this was started hundreds of years ago. Van Leeuwenhoek and Robert Hooke and many other scientists collected cells, oftentimes from their body or from their home, and they would use different types of microscopes to draw what they see. Then they'd send their drawings to each other and, kind of see what everyone's drawing had in common, and decide on, kind of a general agreement about what they saw. And this happened for hundreds of years. It's really important to note that it's not just these two gentlemen that discovered cells and figured out everything we know hundreds of years ago. People collaborated for hundreds of years together to kind of work it out. So after all this study, we kind of agree upon something called the cell theory, and this has 3 parts that you need to know, and that all scientists generally agree on. So the first part of the cell theory that you need to know is that all living things are made up of one or more cells. It's not uncommon to be alive and have one cell. Lots of different organisms are like that, or you could be like us, where you have millions and maybe billions of cells. So all living things, to be alive, a general agreed upon characteristics to be alive is to have cells. Second thing is, cells are the basic unit of structure and of function. So what you're made up of is structure, and what you can do is your function. So everything from like how you eat is all based on, your stomach is made of cells, and it produces enzymes that break down your food and use that, can send that around for energy. So cells are the basic unit. And then the last one, which just blows my mind when I think about this, is cells come from pre-existing cells. So I want you to think about how many cells are in your body. In your cheek alone, you might have hundreds and hundreds of cells. And every cell in your body came from a pre-existing cell. No, like nothing in your body was just like, oop, there's a cell. So the original cells would have been the egg and the sperm that made you who you are, and every cell in your body came from that. And that egg and sperm came from your parents, and they started from an egg and a sperm, and that came from their parents. And you could go back like thousands of years, all these cells dividing to create new cells. It's just crazy. We'll talk more about it in class. What you also need to know is what cells have in common. So all cells, regardless of whether the cells that make you up or bacteria, are going to have an outside called the cell membrane. And this is what controls what enters and exits the cell. So this is a very important part. You want to make sure that disease isn't entering and that energy isn't leaving, unless it's supposed to. Another thing that all cells have are ribosomes. Ribosomes are some of the smallest cell parts we'll talk about, and they help create proteins. We'll learn about them in several units. A third common structure to cells is DNA, or genetic information. The structure of DNA is different depending on the type of cell. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Cytoplasm is this gel-like substance inside the cell that kind of gives the cell some structure and some shape, and it speeds up chemical reactions. 2 types of cells that you need to understand to be proficient in the standards are prokaryotes and eukaryotes. On your notes, the prokaryotes should be really small. That's because prokaryotes, this literally meaning before the kernel or before a nucleus, are small and oftentimes bacteria. Eukaryotes, this U means after kernel, or true kernel. And that's because all eukaryotes have this nucleus, which we can often see under the microscope, and allows eukaryotes to be more complex, bigger, and to have more function. So let's talk first about prokaryotes, the more simple type of cell. These are all your types of bacteria, but not, let me be very clear, not viruses. Viruses are something totally different, much smaller than bacteria. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They have no nucleus. Instead, they have circular DNA that you can see in this diagram here. And they don't have membrane-bound organelles. So they don't have these really complex organelles that have their own, kind of like the cell membrane around them. These are mostly single-celled or unicellular organisms, and they're very, very small. Think about bacteria. We can't see the bacteria we're washing off of our hands, or that's on the door, or that you sneeze into the air when you have a cold. They're very small. They're 1 to 10 microns, and there's 1,000 microns in a millimeter. So in 1 centimeter, you could have lots and lots of bacteria. So prokaryotes. Let's talk about the second type of cells. Eukaryotes are everything but bacteria. And they oftentimes are more complex, having a nucleus here. And then you can see here, and we'll talk more about this in class and in your readings, but kind of like when you go into someone's kitchen and you have a blender and a toaster and a microwave, and they all do different jobs. Well, eukaryotes are big enough and complex enough where you have what we call organelles. And there are these little things in the picture here that all do a very specific job. And they might help each other out, but they each have their own role to play in making the cell work. A lot of times eukaryotes are multicellular organisms, like you and me. We have special cells for our skin, special cells for our bones, special cells for our blood, internal organs. And because we're multicellular, these cells and the organisms that they're a part of can be much, much larger than bacteria. Make sure you can keep these two types of cells, these two categories of cells, prokaryotes and eukaryotes, separate. On your notes, there's this little table. Make sure you know this table. Make sure if it was blank, you could fill it back in, and that you understand the difference. We're going to talk more about eukaryotes in the future because eukaryotes include everything from trees and grasses to you and me to flies to single-celled amoebas that are too small to see without the microscope. So this is a huge category that we'll break down into little teeny pieces. Here's kind of a summary that should match your notes so that you can check to make sure you have everything. And if you really understand this, in class we'll be making a Venn diagram to compare the differences and the similarities. So you could try and do that now with your notes and see if you could do that on your own. Again, if you have any questions, go back, rewind a little bit, and make sure you have everything you need and come to class ready to check for your understanding.